I'd never experienced real terror before the events of that night at the grocery store. I mean, I'd been scared before, jump scares, close calls, the kind of fear that fades as soon as you laugh it off. But this was different. This was the kind of fear that sticks with you, the kind you still think about years later when you're alone at night. I worked late hours, and that night I was exhausted in a way that felt bone deep. The kind of tired where your thoughts come slowly and everything feels slightly unreal, like you're moving through water. It was a Wednesday in the middle of winter, and by the time I pulled into the grocery store parking lot, it was around 11:45 p.m. The store closes at midnight, but I figured I could get in and out quickly. I didn't want to stop at all, honestly. I just wanted to go home and collapse. But I was out of food and didn't feel like dealing with it in the morning. Inside, the store felt lifeless. A few employees drifted around the aisles, stocking shelves without any real urgency. They looked bored and detached, like they were just waiting for the clock to hit midnight so they could leave. One of them leaned against a cart, scrolling on their phone. Another slowly dragged boxes across the floor, the sound echoing louder than it should have. I remember thinking how strange it was that places meant for people can feel so empty late at night. I grabbed milk, bread, and a couple of snacks and went through self-checkout. The machine beeped too loudly in the quiet store. When I finally stepped back outside, the cold air hit me hard. My phone said it was 12:25. The parking lot looked completely different than it had when I arrived. Most of the lights were dimmed, some flickering faintly, and nearly all the cars were gone. Mine was parked far back, near one of the last lampposts still fully lit. That's when I noticed him. He was standing right near that lamppost, leaning against it casually, like he'd been there for a while. At first, I told myself not to overthink it. People wait for rides all the time, I thought. Still, something about him made my stomach tighten. He wasn't moving. Not shifting his weight, not checking his phone, just facing my direction. As I walked closer, I realized he was watching me. Not glancing, watching. His head turned slightly as I moved, tracking me with slow precision. It felt deliberate, like he didn't care if I noticed. I remember thinking, just get to the car, don't do anything weird, don't look scared. My hand was shaking when I unlocked the door with the remote. I tossed my grocery bags onto the passenger seat and slid into the driver's seat, already feeling a rush of relief. Then I heard footsteps. They were fast, not hurried, not uncertain, purposeful, closing the distance too quickly. Every part of my body reacted before my brain caught up. My heart slammed into my ribs, my hands went numb, and I locked the doors so hard my thumb hurt. I shoved the key into the ignition and looked up just as he reached my passenger side window. He grabbed the handle and pulled. That sound, that sharp click of the locked door was horrifying. It felt final, like a thin line between safety and something much worse. He didn't say anything. He pulled again, harder this time, then leaned down until his face was inches from the glass. That's when I saw his eyes. They weren't angry. They weren't wild or drunk or panicked. They were empty, blank and dark, like deep holes of nothing. Not curiosity, not rage, just absence, like he was looking through me instead of at me. I remember thinking, this person doesn't see me as a person. That thought terrified me more than anything else. He pressed his forehead lightly against the window, fogging the glass with his breath, and for a split second, I was convinced he was going to start hitting it. I felt trapped. My chest was so tight I could barely breathe. Then instinct took over. I slammed my foot on the gas, and the car lurched forward. I didn't even look to see if he stepped back. I just drove. I tore out of the parking lot, tires screeching, nearly hopping the curb as I turned onto the road. Only once I was several blocks away did I realize my hands were shaking uncontrollably. My heart was racing so hard it felt like it might break out of my chest. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see him chasing me or standing in the road behind me. The relief didn't come right away. It came in waves, sharp bursts followed by a hollow, shaky calm. I didn't call the police. I didn't tell anyone that night. I just wanted to be home, somewhere with walls and locks. The next morning, everything felt surreal, like it had happened to someone else. When I went out to my car to grab the groceries I'd forgotten, I noticed something on the passenger side window. Smudges. Thick, oily fingerprints smeared across the glass where he'd pulled on the handle. They weren't faint. They were clear enough that I could trace where his fingers had slipped. Seeing them made my knees weak. That's when it really hit me, how close it had been, how tired I had been, how easily things could have gone differently. I still shop at that grocery store sometimes. I tell my friends about it the same way people tell stories they still don't fully understand, laughing a little too quickly, glossing over the worst parts. But I never go at night anymore, and I never park in the back row again.
I live alone in a small apartment complex in a quiet town, one of those places people call safe because nothing ever seems to happen there. The building is old, 4 stories tall, narrow stairwells, long hallways that echo no matter how softly you walk. The doors never shut cleanly. They always slam, even when you try to ease them closed. At night, the pipes creak and groan when the heat kicks in, like something shifting inside the walls. I'd only lived there a few months when this happened, and I was still learning which sounds were normal. The ticking radiator, the dull thud of footsteps overhead, the occasional door closing somewhere down the hall. That night, everything was quiet. It was a Friday, around 9. I just finished dinner and was stretched out on the couch, scrolling through my phone with the TV murmuring in the background. Outside, the wind slipped through the old window frames, whistling faintly. The apartment felt smaller than usual, wrapped too tightly in silence. That's why the knock startled me so badly. 3 heavy raps against my door. Slow, deliberate. Not the kind of knock someone uses when they're worried about being polite. My heart jumped into my throat. I sat upright, staring at the door, waiting to see if it would happen again. It didn't. I stayed frozen for a few seconds, listening. The hallway was completely silent. No footsteps, no voices, just the low hum of the building. Finally, I stood and walked toward the door, each step feeling louder than it should have been. I leaned forward and looked through the peephole. There was a man standing in the hallway holding a pizza box. He wore a dark hoodie, the hood pulled low so most of his face was hidden in shadow. The overhead light didn't quite reach him. All I could see clearly was his jaw, dusted with faint stubble, and his mouth hanging slightly open. His head tilted just a little. Then he spoke. "Delivery for 2B." His voice was flat, calm, like he was reading off a script. Something immediately felt wrong. My apartment was 2A, and I hadn't ordered food. "You've got the wrong place," I said through the door. "This is 2A." He didn't look down at the apartment number, didn't shift his weight. He just stood there holding the box, like he was waiting for me to open the door anyway. After a pause that stretched too long, he spoke again. "Are you sure?" The words were simple, but the way he said them made my stomach tighten. There was no confusion in his voice, no apology, just something faintly amused, like he already knew the answer. I took a step back from the door, suddenly aware of how thin it felt. "Yes," I said, louder now, "you've got the wrong apartment." For a moment, I thought he might leave. Instead, he knocked again. Hard. The door rattled in its frame, the sound echoing down the hall. I felt the vibration through the floor, up my legs. My hands had started to shake. I backed away and grabbed my phone off the coffee table. I thought about calling the police, but something stopped me. Instead, I called the building's front desk security and told them there was a man at my door claiming to deliver food I hadn't ordered and that he wouldn't leave. The guard said he'd come up right away. I returned to the door and checked the peephole again. He was still there, standing perfectly still. This time, his chin was tilted just slightly upward, just enough that I could see more of his mouth beneath the hood's shadow. I had the unmistakable feeling he was smiling. The seconds dragged by. I couldn't hear anything else. No neighbors, no elevators, nothing. Just the hum of the building and my own breathing, shallow and fast. Then he lifted one hand and pressed it flat against my door. Through the peephole, I watched his fingers slide into view one by one until his palm rested fully against the wood. He didn't knock. He didn't push. He just held it there, like he was feeling for me on the other side. I stood frozen, clutching my phone, barely breathing. My mouth felt dry. My legs felt weak. He stayed like that for nearly a minute. Finally, I heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairwell. Relief hit me so suddenly it almost made me dizzy. I glanced away from the peephole for just a second. When I looked back, the hallway was empty. The security guard arrived moments later. He checked the hallway, the stairwell, even outside the building. No one was there. But sitting on the floor directly in front of my door was the pizza box. I didn't want to touch it. The guard picked it up and opened it instead. It was empty. No pizza, no crust, nothing at all. Just an old, greasy cardboard box. We went downstairs to check the security cameras. The cameras on my floor hadn't recorded anything that night. A malfunction, the guard said. There was no footage of the man entering the hallway, no proof he ever been there. The guard told me to keep my door locked and try to get some sleep. I still live there, and every time I hear a knock on my door, I hesitate, because I'll never forget that calm, mocking voice on the other side asking me, "Are you sure?"
I didn't think of it as a scary experience at first. For a long time, I told it like it was just a weird night. One of those stories you bring up with friends when you're talking about dumb things you did when you were younger. But the older I get, the more I realize how close we were to something going very wrong. This happened about 10 years ago when I was still a teenager. I was 16 at the time, and like a lot of kids that age, I thought I was a lot tougher and smarter than I really was. A couple of friends and I decided to go camping in the woods just outside our town. It wasn't an official campground, just a clearing we knew about from older kids. There were no signs, no fire pits, nothing marked on any map. You parked off a dirt road and hiked in for about 30 minutes until the trees opened up into a small clearing. There were 4 of us, me, my best friend Dylan, and 2 others, Mark and Jesse. We went in the late afternoon, laughing the whole way, carrying cheap tents and backpacks that were way too heavy. At that point, it felt like an adventure, something we'd joke about later. We set up the tent before dark and built a small fire as the sun went down. The woods were calm, no wind, no strange noises, just the crackle of the fire and the occasional insect buzzing past our ears. I remember feeling relaxed in a way you only do when you're young and convinced nothing bad can happen to you. By the time it was fully dark, we were sitting around the fire roasting marshmallows and telling stupid stories. The firelight barely pushed back the darkness. Beyond it, the woods felt thick and endless, like the trees were closing in the farther you looked. It was around midnight when we heard it. At first, I thought I imagined it, a faint sound drifting in from somewhere deep in the woods. 3 soft notes, slow and deliberate. A whistle. I remember looking up at Dylan and asking if he heard that. He nodded, squinting into the darkness. Mark laughed and said it was probably another group camping nearby. That explanation made sense, and we clung to it a little too quickly. But the whistling didn't stop. It came again a few minutes later. Same 3 notes, same slow pace. Only this time, it sounded like it was coming from a different direction. That was the moment I started to feel uneasy. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, maybe someone walking through the woods, maybe the sound carrying strangely at night. But the longer it went on, the harder it was to ignore the pattern. Every time it stopped, it would start up again somewhere else, always just out of sight. It felt like we were being circled. No one was laughing anymore. The conversation died off naturally, replaced by long stretches of silence where all four of us just listened. I could feel my heart beating harder each time the sound returned. Eventually, Dylan stood up and shouted into the trees, telling whoever it was to knock it off. His voice sounded smaller than he probably intended, swallowed almost immediately by the darkness. The whistling stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. It felt heavy, like the woods were holding their breath. I remember realizing how isolated we were. No cell service, no nearby houses, no one could hear us if something happened. We waited. 5 minutes, 10, nothing. I started to relax again, just a little, convincing myself we'd scared the person off. That's when the first rock hit the ground near the tent. It wasn't thrown hard, just a soft thud in the dirt, close enough that we all jumped. We stared at it in the firelight, not wanting to look away. Then another one landed, and another. They weren't coming from one direction either. They landed from different angles, spaced out just enough to feel intentional, like whoever was doing it wanted us to know they were still there. My mouth went dry. I remember thinking, this isn't a prank. Jesse grabbed his flashlight and swept it across the tree line. The beam cut through the darkness, but it didn't reveal much, just trunks, branches, and shadows layered on top of shadows. That's when Jesse swore he saw someone move, ducking behind a tree just as the light passed over them. That was enough. No one argued, no one tried to act brave. We stomped out the fire as quickly as we could, hands shaking, throwing dirt over the embers. We shoved everything back into our packs without caring how messy it was. The hike back felt completely different than the hike in. The trail seemed longer, darker. Every snapped twig made my stomach drop. I kept turning around, half expecting someone right behind us. The worst part was the feeling that we weren't alone anymore, that we were being followed at a distance just far enough to stay hidden. No footsteps, no voices, just presence. When we finally reached the dirt lot where we'd parked, relief hit me so suddenly my legs felt weak. The cars looked unreal, like something out of a dream. We piled in without saying a word. Dylan started the engine, headlights cutting through the trees at the edge of the lot. That's when I looked back toward the trail. I wish I hadn't. At the edge of the tree line, just where the light began to fade, there was someone standing there, or crouching. It was hard to tell. His posture was wrong, too low, too still. He wasn't trying to hide anymore. He wasn't waving or shouting or moving towards us. He was just watching. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel his attention on us in a way that made my skin crawl. It wasn't curiosity. It felt patient, like he'd been waiting to see what we'd do. I remember thinking, if we hadn't left when we did. I yelled at Dylan to go, my voice cracking. The car lurched forward, tires kicking up dirt as we sped away. I kept watching the trees in the side mirror until they disappeared into darkness. None of us spoke the entire drive home. Even afterwards, we didn't talk about it much. When we did, it was always casual, like it was just some weird guy messing with us. But every time I replay it in my head, I think about how silent he was, how deliberate everything felt. I still don't know what his intentions were. Maybe he just wanted to scare us. Maybe it was something worse. What I do know is that he never said a word. And that scares me more than anything else.